and groups. So Carly and Claudia explained how the Nikkei Memory Capture Project represents a really exciting transnational initiative and collaboration. Our institutions and our members are transatlantic, and our imagination, I believe, is definitively trans-Pacific. But I want you to step back from that for a moment to reflect. At the heart of this global crisscross, sitting at the center of all the project's connections, is here, you, Southern Alberta. And at the heart of that, the focus of our study is the history of Nikkei in this area. So what I'd like to do over the course of maybe the next 10 minutes is to give you a little bit of historical background and, more importantly, some of the problems and questions which inform the Nikkei Memory Capture Project. And specifically the Stop the Presses exhibition, which you've come here to see today. I'll then explain a little bit more about the exhibition itself. So what does Nikkei mean, that word Nikkei? The character Ni stands for Japan, so you'll see it in Nihon or Nippon, which is the Japanese word for Japan. There's also Kei, which means lineage or descent. So when you put the two together, Nikkei, you get of Japanese descent. But of course, for us, it's much more than that. We're not here to study a dictionary definition. So if we begin to apply the lens of the global Japanese diaspora that began in the latter part of the 19th century, when modernizing Japan sent its people out to project Japanese influence in culture, then if we apply on top of that another lens, a lens of Canadian nation building, including its conquest of the peoples and lands of the northern part of the North American Great Plains, on whose western edge Alberta sits, Nikkei becomes a historical idea and imagination. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about at least one version of that. So from the beginning of the 20th century, we have those very first hardy and adventurous pioneers, the Issei pioneers, those who came from Japan, the original immigrants, who established a settlement in Raymond and in Hardyville. Then there came the many forced migrations that formed the evacuations and incarcerations of the wartime period, when trumped up concerns over security trumped the ideals of citizenship in order to make the Dominion and Empire great again, as you shall see in the exhibition. And remember that for the Canadians of Japanese descent, the Second World War was actually a 7-year war, beginning in 1942, when the Canadian government decimated the West Coast communities of their own Canadian citizens, dislocated and divided the families of their own Canadian citizens, destroyed their businesses, systematically dispossessed them of their property, and most importantly, this Canadian government dispossessed their own citizens of their rights, which would only be returned in 1949. They then commenced the rebuilding. Emerging from the derogations of war, many Japanese Canadians remained in southern Alberta to rebuild their lives and communities, and within a generation, they not only achieved a comfortable life, their near total ethnic assimilation was matched by complete social integration. In 1988, when the Canadian government issued an apology for the wrongs that the nation had once committed, the Japanese Canadians were elevated as exemplars of individuals and communities overcoming the most dramatically difficult of difficult tragedies. So I've given you something of a potted history here. It's certainly a tantalizing story that I think I've suggested, one which I don't necessarily contest on certain levels. And yet something, or rather maybe many things, a multitude of stories are missing. Stories which the Nikkei Memory Capture Project aims to hear, record, and return to the community. So today's event commences this new narration of new stories, and we invite you to light that spark, to remember, to narrate history, to own it, and in the inspiring words of so many Albertans of Japanese descent that I've met, including just one person the other day, Mr. Joe Tomiyama, he said, "Make the past live." And he pounded his hand on the table as he said that, and it was absolutely eloquent and truly inspiring. So as you look through the Stop the Presses exhibition, you might begin to notice that the histories which are portrayed are not always quite what they seem. We invite you to read and see with curiosity, evaluate critically and openly, but if I might ask, please share your thoughts, ideas, and memories with us. You may or may not see the exhibition pivot in tone on the mid-century. The aim, however, is not to retell the wartime story of Nikkei, this moment when the inalienable and incontrovertible ideals of democracy were suddenly alienated and controverted. That's well-researched and that's well-rehearsed. Rather, consider how the Albertans of Japanese descent, and more broadly Canadians, were the product of two empires colliding and collapsing, one on which the sun supposedly never set, and the other from which the sun ostensibly always rose. So in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, these post-war decades after the conflagration of the Pacific War burnt itself out, Canada sought to redefine itself, and the multitudes of people it had invited from around the globe to contribute to this discussion. These Albertans of Japanese descent, by and large, took advantage of that post-war boom.